Welcome to video lecture on the dissolution of monasteries. Let me see the introduction. When Henry VIII became the supreme head of the Church of England, the Act of Supremacy passed in 1534 by the Reformation Parliament. The king wanted to cut down the authority of the Pope, and at the same time, he wanted to take revenge on the monks and the friars who were still loyal to the Pope. So in 1536, he made the Reformation Parliament to pass an act to dissolve all the monasteries in England. This was called the Dissolution of Monasteries. Let's see the timeline of the Dissolution of Monasteries. 1534, the Act of Supremacy passed. 1536, First Dissolution Act was passed. 1536, Pilgrimage of Grace. 1539, Second Dissolution Act was passed. And 1540-41, final closures. First, let's see the causes for the dissolution of monasteries. The causes for the dissolution of monasteries were many. They are the king's personal anger against the Pope. The common people were very much dissatisfied with the corrupted lives of the monks and the friars. Thus, the public supported the king. The king was in need of money to assert the superiority over the Pope. The monasteries owned immense wealth in the form of cash, jewels, estates, and other properties. So the king was tempted to dissolve the monasteries and take away their wealth. With these reasons, all the monasteries were ordered to be dissolved in 1536. Immediately after the act was passed, 400 monasteries were dissolved. It resulted in the rebellion of the monks and friars, and it was called the Pilgrimage of Grace, that we have seen in the timeline in the previous slide. By 1539, all the monasteries in England were dissolved. The last big monastery to be dissolved was the one that was Waltham. Totally 5,000 monks, 1,600 friars, and 2,000 nuns were expelled from the monasteries. So this is the mind map for your brief view. Execution and immediate resistance that happened during the period 1536 to 1539. So 400 monasteries dissolved immediately following the act 1536. 5,000 monks expelled, 1,600 friars expelled, and 2,000 nuns expelled. So the timeline ends with the dissolution of the last big monastery at Waltham. The Pilgrimage of Grace, that is in 1536. The sheer scale and speed of the 1536 expulsions triggered massive societal shock. Displaced monks and friars immediately orchestrated a major rebellion, illustrating the profound local resistance to the crown's economic extraction. The consequences. Immediately after the dissolution, the immense wealth owned by the monasteries was taken over by the king. The movable property like cash, jewels, furniture, and robes were personally owned by the king. The landed properties were sold to the rich lords for the low rates, and the money was taken over by the king. The rich lords were interested only in the wool trade, so they didn't use the land for agriculture. They enclosed the fields to feed their cattle and improved the wool trade. The enclosure of the fields threw the agricultural laborers out of job, and so employment problem became very severe in England. In the name of mercy, the poor, the sick, the aged, and the orphans were looked after by the monasteries. The hospitals attached to the monasteries did them free service. When the monasteries were dissolved, they were thrown to the streets. So the numbers of wandering beggars were increased. Since the monks and friars were great scholars in the classic languages, they maintained great classics in Greek and Latin in their libraries. But when the monasteries were dissolved, these libraries were burnt, and it was a great loss to the field of education. Conclusion. So, by the dissolution of monasteries, the poor people of England were much affected. Only the rich lords were benefited. But since the lords invested the money in industry, it promoted economic growth of England. The huge sum so far sent to Pope, it was cut off, and it was spent on improving the local welfare of England. On the whole, the economic process and the industrial growth of England became better after the dissolution of monasteries. Thank you.